coming up. But I can say at this point, you have to conclude that she's the most likely candidate for the nomination to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, as you know, I tend to try to cover issues slightly different from those that comprise the bulk of the media coverage for the week, or at least cover them from a different angle. But there is simply no way to avoid the biggest development in the news this time. That an 87-year-old jurist racked by cancer passed away surely couldn't be described as shocking. But somehow it was, for me and millions of others. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg simply seemed indestructible. There had been so many instances of her being hospitalized, up to 5 bouts with cancer since 1999, so many times rumored to be at death's door and then recovering so many times that I think we all just figured she would never die, as if she were some diminutive female version of the Highlander. But she did pass, and my heart and all our hearts should go out to her family as they struggle with the loss of a groundbreaking jurist and family member with whom we should all be impressed, even if we disagree with many, even most, of her Supreme Court opinions. And I don't simply say this in light of her passing. I'm reminded of the fact that I pointed out that she could be an inspiration to us all in episode 10 of Political Spirits, not because of her political opinions, but rather because she demonstrated to us all that the fundamental proposition of Political Spirits, that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk, is the right one. And it was her relationship with Supreme Court Justice the late Antonin Scalia that demonstrated her belief in that proposition. As I noted in episode 10, as just about everyone knows, Justice Ginsburg was one of the most liberal, perhaps the most liberal justice on the Supreme Court. And as just about everyone also knows, Justice Antonin Scalia, who passed away in 2016, was perhaps the most conservative justice on the Supreme Court in recent memory. But many people don't know that Justices Ginsburg and Scalia were best friends. In fact, Justice Ginsburg said that they were, quote, best buddies, close quote. And as we struggle with the divides in society, the polarization that causes many to refuse to associate with those who disagree with them, the fact that they were best buddies should be an inspiration to us all. As the Washington Post reported in its February 13, 2016 edition, in an article by Erin Carman, Scalia was Ginsburg's preferred souvenir shopping partner on trips together, and they actually rode together on an elephant on a trip to India. As the author noted, Scalia rode up front on the elephant and asked Ginsburg regarding that decision, "What about feminism?" She replied it had to do with the distribution of weight. I love that response. Justice Scalia was fairly portly, and Justice Ginsburg was diminutive, to say the least. I sometimes picture her as an older version of Edna Mode from The Incredibles. No capes! As I did in episode 10, I'll close on the subject with a quote from Justice Scalia from the Washington Post article. Quote, "If you can't disagree ardently with your colleagues about some issues of law and yet personally still be friends, get another job for Pete's sake." Close quote. I'd like to take that sentiment a bit further, as I did in episode 10. This is America. The whole point of democracy, or in our case a constitutional republic, is for the electorate's voice to determine how it's governed. To have your voice determine how you're governed presupposes that some thought has gone into what you say. You really can't have given it much thought if you haven't at least talked to the people who think differently from you, or at least read about it. So my take on Justice Scalia's quote is a somewhat broader one. If you can't disagree ardently with your fellow Americans about some issues of public policy and politics, and yet personally still be friends, find another country for Pete's sake. Justices Ginsburg and Scalia are now together again, just as they were so often together as friends in their time on the court, because they understood that this is America and that disagreeing about law and politics but remaining friends is the way this country was meant to be. Next topic. RBG death impact on election, and who will President Trump pick? I'm not sure what else 2020 can throw at us, and right now I'm not sure I want to think about it. Let's just focus for the moment on what the death of Justice Ginsburg will likely mean for the election. I'll admit that my initial reaction was to think that there isn't enough time to nominate and push a new justice through the Senate. But as a practical matter, President Trump really couldn't have held back. His reputation among his supporters is that he is someone who gets things done. And don't forget, notwithstanding the losses that Republicans suffered in the House in the midterms in 2018, they actually increased their hold on the Senate. They gained seats. And given that the Senate is the body which approves judicial appointments, the argument can be made, and now has been made, that the electorate wanted Republicans to continue to control judicial appointments. In retrospect, there was really no way President Trump and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell could have deferred appointing a new justice until after the election. But just because politically they had to move forward with the nomination doesn't mean that nomination will be approved, and it also doesn't address the impact on the election of going through the process. So who will President Trump nominate? Will his nominee be approved, and what will be the impact on the election? Well, he's already announced that the nominee will be a woman. That's not a surprise. There are multiple well-qualified women on President Trump's list, and nominating a woman would help undercut some inevitable attacks from the left if he replaced a female justice with a male one. And after what happened with Brett Kavanaugh, and given the need to move the nominee through the process much more quickly than has been the norm in recent years, a female nominee seems the obvious tactical choice. Moreover, Judge Amy Coney Barrett of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit was widely regarded to be the leading potential nominee by President Trump when the next opening occurred. Given that she's a devout Catholic, she would help placate much of President Trump's base, most notably religious conservatives. I should note that Axios reported on March 31, 2019, in an article by Jonathan Swan and Sam Baker, that 3 sources had said that President Trump had said about Judge Barrett that, quote, "I'm saving her for Ginsburg," close quote. Now, I'm not particularly fond of relying on unnamed sources, so I'm certainly not going to say that the Axios report is correct, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Another possibility is Judge Barbara Lagoa, a Cuban-American woman from Florida on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. She formerly served on the Florida Supreme Court, and at 52, she's 4 years older than Barrett. But she would still be the youngest justice on the court if nominated and confirmed. Obviously, President Trump will want to back a relatively young justice to maximize the impact on future court decisions. She was easily confirmed by the Senate for the 11th Circuit nomination with a bipartisan vote of 85 to 15. She served in the Florida state court system on the 3rd District Court of Appeal for 13 years, eventually becoming chief judge before being appointed by Florida Governor DeSantis to the Supreme Court of Florida in 2019. She served for less than a year on that court before being nominated by President Trump to the 11th Circuit. Judge Lagoa has a much more extensive judicial career than Judge Barrett, who spent most of her time practicing law as a law professor rather than on the bench. And there is one interesting angle about Judge Lagoa that should perhaps make her stand out somewhat from the crowd. If you spend too much time watching MSNBC and CNN or listening to leftist professors spout off about the oppressors and the oppressed in society, you might think that Hispanics automatically vote Democrat, but that's far from the truth. and there's increasing evidence that it will be even further from the truth in this election. Just look at the poll results I talked about a week ago, showing President Trump up 38% among Cuban Americans in Florida. Nominating Judge Lagoa would bring Hispanic support for President Trump up for discussion in the news cycle. It would help point out the huge lead that President Trump appears to have among Cuban Americans in Florida. It would reintroduce to the news cycle Joe Biden's poor performance so far in exciting the Hispanic American electorate. It would undercut the media narrative that the Republican Party is simply the party of white males, and it would integrate, so to speak, perfectly with the message of the Republican National Convention. Incidentally, it would also help bolster the standing of the excellent Republican governor who nominated her to the Florida Supreme Court, Ron DeSantis, and help offset the absurd, over-the-top attacks from the left-wing media on his governorship. I can't say for sure that President Trump will choose Judge Lagoa, but I can say at this point you have to conclude that she's the most likely candidate for the nomination to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I can also say that whatever choice he does make, we won't have to wait long for it. So the big question is, can President Trump get a nomination approved in time? Well, in theory, he has 45 days to get it done by the election. Now, you might be thinking, actually, he has all the way until the inauguration, even if, God forbid, Joe Biden were to win. But actually, he really doesn't have that long. He only has the 45 days because of something that, to my knowledge, Senator Ted Cruz was the first person to point out publicly. And that is that given the likelihood of this election being disputed in the courts, we need to make sure that the Supreme Court is fully staffed at the time the election occurs. The last thing we need is to be looking to the Supreme Court to resolve a critical dispute determining who will be president, only to find that the court is split 4-4. I remember the days when college football games ended in ties. We don't need that in the Supreme Court on a presidential election dispute. So who can he get through in that time frame? Nobody would be easy, but I suspect that Judge Lagoa presents a better chance of doing so than Judge Barrett. Given that Republicans currently hold 53 seats in the Senate, they can only afford to lose 3 Republicans and then have Vice President Pence cast the tie-breaking vote as Senate President. Incidentally, if Senator Martha McSally in Arizona were to lose her special election, her replacement could be seated by late November, thus dropping the margin to 52-48, all the more reason to resolve the nomination by November 3. So how likely is it that the Republicans will be able to get 50 votes on the Senate floor and then add Mike Pence to approve the nomination? Well, Republican Senators Collins from Maine and Murkowski from Alaska, not a big surprise here, have already said that they will not support a nomination prior to the election. That means the Republicans can only lose 1 more vote, unless somehow they were to offset it with a Democrat vote, and I think we can all agree that it's highly unlikely that Republicans could ever get a Democrat vote under the circumstances. So, with Collins and Murkowski off the table, that leaves 3 senators as potential no votes. The first and biggest one has already said he'll support the nomination, and that's Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. That leaves 2 potential Republicans who might defect from supporting the nominee, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa and Senator Mitt Romney of Utah. Now, I'm fed up with Senator Romney's opposition to President Trump, and I wouldn't be even slightly surprised if Senator Romney were to vote against the nominee. But on balance, I'm slightly more concerned that Senator Grassley will oppose the nominee. For one thing, Senator Grassley has actually said some things in the past which more than imply that he wouldn't support a nomination prior to the election. Moreover, Senator Romney's office firmly rejected reporting that he had already decided to oppose a nomination. Finally, there may be some pressure from his Mormon supporters for Senator Romney to vote yes. And that's how close it is. Actually, it's even closer than that, because Senator Cory Gardner from Colorado can't be ruled out as someone who might oppose the nomination. We could easily be in a situation where Collins, Murkowski, and Grassley have all voted no, and we're relying on the vote of Mitt Romney and Cory Gardner, too, for that matter. That's not a position I want to be in. So the bottom line is that at this point, the odds of President Trump winning re-election may be higher than the odds of him getting Senate approval of a Supreme Court nomination before the election. That's all the more reason to hope that he'll win re-election, and incidentally, I still think he will. But how does this Supreme Court nomination battle impact President Trump's chances of winning re-election? My initial thought was that, on balance, it hurts him. One of the biggest challenges the Democrats face is having a candidate who's about as exciting as an Undertaker's convention. He can't draw a crowd. His campaign routinely announces at 8:30 a.m. that he won't be emerging for the entire day. He typically flees the stage without taking questions from reporters, local or otherwise. And when he does take questions at national events like the recent CNN town hall, they're such softballs that they look like they were drafted by the campaign itself. He doesn't seem to be exciting Hispanics. He doesn't seem to be exciting Bernie supporters. You want to really challenge a Democrat who plans to vote for Joe Biden? Ask them to explain why they're voting for Joe Biden without using the word Trump. Don't be surprised if you start seeing smoke coming out of their head like a depiction of a computer caught in an endless loop and about to explode in a 1960s or 70s movie or TV show. Obviously, there is tremendous opposition to President Trump within the Democratic Party, and that might be enough. But typically, you need more than that. You need an actual candidate that excites the members of your party. If you don't have it, what happens if the number one issue that most people care about, no matter what they say, the economy, starts looking so good that the members of your party that really don't like Donald Trump, but don't hate him to the core, start to look at the economic numbers and secretly say to themselves, you know what, I might have to vote for this guy. Or what if you fear for your family's safety when you watch rioting around the country and you're a Democrat who says to yourself, I might have to vote for Trump? If you're in Joe Biden's campaign, how do you offset that if you can't make your candidate exciting? Joe Biden is not going to miraculously turn into Barack Obama or a young Bill Clinton. He is what he is, and not much of it is that good. But what if a liberal Supreme Court justice dies and you're faced with the prospect of her being replaced by a conservative? Does that sway the Democrats who might otherwise be drawn to President Trump by the economy or a law and order message? Does the abortion issue keep them anchored on the Democrat side of the fence? Well, my initial thought was it might. My initial thought is that the death of Justice Ginsburg might elevate the abortion issue to at or near the top of the list for large numbers of Democrat voters. It might excite them. It might make up for having a god-awful candidate at the top of the Democrat ticket. But now I'm not so sure. I suspect that the vast, vast majority of Democrats for whom abortion is a key issue are already so anti-Trump that nothing could make a difference. And for those for which it isn't the key issue, I suspect that it can't trump, so to speak, the economy and safety. If that's the right call, then President Trump having this nomination could actually work in his favor. Among other things, it could drive Republican voters to the poll in support of Republican Senate candidates in massive numbers. It could even make the difference in a couple of Senate races. And by the way, with Joe Biden constantly running ads talking about himself as the person who can return the country to stability and normalcy, as each leftist screams into a camera on social media and threatens to burn it all down, as Democrat leadership threatens to pack the Supreme Court, they undermine the message that Biden's side is the side of normalcy, and instead remind the electorate their side has been the side of overreaction, lawlessness, and insanity. So what could energize the Democrats? Defeating the president's nominee. Doing so would excite the base in a way that Joe Biden never could. And in that respect, President Trump's decision to pursue a nomination is risky. But in the end, it would have been more risky for him not to pursue it. In the end, he has to demonstrate week in and week out that he's doing the job. Democrats can dispute whether he's doing it well, but he won't give them the opportunity to make a reasonable argument that he isn't doing it at all. And I'll keep doing the job as well, coming back next week with another episode of Political Spirits. Please join me and tell your friends to do so as well, and like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits. And follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell, and select all after you hit the bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.